some of the core resources that we have for Azure computing. So we're going to look at compute resources. We're going to look at networking resources. We're going to look at database resources and storage resources. So those are the four sort of areas that Microsoft excels in terms of the Azure resource utilization and capability. So from an Azure compute systems point of view, Azure, as I mentioned before, is an on-demand computing service that will give you computing resources, including disk, processor, memory, networking, and operating systems. And how they deliver that infrastructure to you is really neat. So if you were to picture in your mind a desk, so you have a desk that's flat, okay? Underneath that is a piece of hardware. So let's say it's a server of some sort. And under that server, there is memory and networking capabilities and storage capabilities on that system, right? So the desk is what you get to see, and there's all that underlying infrastructure below it. On top of that desk, you can build different things that will do different tasks. So as an example, on the top of that desk, you can build a virtual machine. So you could build a Hyper-V virtual machine there that is going to be a file server, and it's going to be called FileServe1. And so when you go in to create the virtual machine, it says, I need to have this virtual machine have 4 CPUs, and it needs to have 64 gigs of memory, and it needs to have 1 terabyte of storage space. So because it's sitting on the flat surface of the desk, which has resources below it, then the virtual machine taps into those resources underneath the desk. So it taps into the CPU that's sitting there. It taps into the memory that's available for there. It taps into the networking and the storage that's listed under there. And it allocates those resources that you've requested to that virtual machine. And because of the fact that it's a flat system, you can implement as many virtual machines as you wish into that production or into that environment, production or dev or test or whatever you want. And as long as you have the bill and you know what the bill is going to be and you pay the bill every month, there's really no limit to the number of those systems that you can put on that desktop, okay? Now, let's say that you don't want to manage virtual machines. So we're going to clear the desktop off again. So it's blank, it's empty. So on this flat desk, I'm going to install a service. Let's say that I want to install Exchange, okay? So Exchange as an application service is already managed by Microsoft. All I see on the top of the desk is the front door, which is what asks for my username and password. Once I'm in the front door, my instance of Exchange that's sitting on my desk will have storage allocated for the mailboxes, for backup, for archiving purposes, and so forth. And so as an administrator, only need to be able to get in the door and create the mailboxes for the individual users that I'm going to have, and then administer how those mailboxes are going to work. Let's say I'm going to put on legal holds, which means that all of the data will never be able to be deleted out of a person's mailbox and things like that, right? And so that's what an application service is. So if I go that I want to build an Exchange service, it literally just rises itself out of the tabletop and says, oh, here I am, here's your credentials, have at it, right? I will manage and worry about everything that lives below it. So again, let's clear off our desktop. It's totally blank. Now I'm going to create containers, okay? Now there are 2 different container types that exist in virtual spaces. One is called Docker, and one is called Azure Kubernetes, okay? So Docker is an original old Unix-based container system that allows you to that allows you to create virtual instances of stuff inside of it. Kubernetes is just another version of it. It's sort of an open source version, and we'll talk about those in the next slide. And then the Windows Virtual Desktop is the the capability of being virtualization across the board. when we get to that slide, there's a couple of new things that have actually been added in the last little bit that I will talk about. I didn't put a separate slide for them, but I will talk about them. So Azure Virtual Machines, as I mentioned before, is a virtual machine software emulation component capability of physical computers. So if you've ever done any virtualization in your on-premise network, all you're doing is taking that virtualization and doing it in the cloud, right? So you're not really creating a machine. You're creating a virtual processor, virtual memory, virtual storage, and networking that is allocated and associated to your tenant. And this is where your IaaS offering comes in, because it gives you that capability to have absolute and total control and be able to customize how that system is working and make sure that it's executing correctly. So with this, you would use these for development and testing infrastructure. Also maybe Azure for applications that you want to manage in the cloud. That, let's say that you have an in-house application that you've written, it's a web-based app. And so you would build a virtual machine that you would deploy it to, and then use that as a way to handle your business, right? This might be also be an example of when we have increased resource utilization because we're at a specific time of year, Cyber Monday, whatever. You can add the virtual machines, you pay for them as you need them, and then as you're done, you just turn them off and you don't need them anymore, you don't pay for them. Also, a lot of times with Azure, because of the way that the billing structure works, it's advantageous to actually shut systems off when you're not being used, which is one of the reasons why Azure has become quite popular for development houses. And the reason for that is because you can create your virtual machines in the cloud for development. And at the end of the day, you either have the developer shut them off, or you can actually have an auto disable function where, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, Azure will just actually shut the virtual machine down. It doesn't just power it off, but it'll actually shut it down properly. And as long as the virtual machine is not running, you're not billed for it. So that the system will actually help you in reducing your overall number of costs in the system. The other thing you want to do with Azure Virtual Machines is to extend your on-premise data center. So when we talked earlier about creating a hybrid network or a hybrid cloud, you may want to take some of your virtual machines that you have internally on your network and extend them into the cloud for backup purposes, or making it a hot site, or just spreading the load of your overall network utilization across multiple platforms. So the Azure App Service is basically just a fully managed platform. And this is where you will do your building, deployment, and testing, scalability, all that sort of stuff as a developer, okay? So you can apply application protocols, you can do web apps, you can do all sorts of stuff. And it supports with most of the major development languages, including things like the .NET platform, core .NET functionality, Node.JavaScript, Java, Python, PHP, Visual Basic, C#, C++, all pretty much any of the .NET compliant languages, of which there are well over 100 of them. And this is where platform as a service is done, where you have your enterprise level performance, security, compliance requirements, but not having to deal with the underlying software infrastructure management pieces that a normal person would do under IaaS. So we mentioned before the idea of Azure containers. So the Azure Container Service is built upon the containerization of a network. So I'm going to use the empty desk analogy again. So if you have a desk that is, 3 feet by 2 feet wide and 4 feet tall, right? It's sort of a rectangular shape. That is a container within the underlying Azure infrastructure. So when I sign up for Azure and I get my tenant name, brentdawson@gmail.com, then I am given a container that will do all of the things that I need it to do: memory, CPU, virtual machines, whatever it happens to be. The nice thing about Azure is that that container that I have allows you to create containers inside of it. And so what a container really is that it is a lightweight virtualized environment. You don't need an operating system that you have to manage, and it can be responsible to any types of changes that you create. That sounds a lot like Azure itself, right? And really, all Azure is a glorified hardware-based container service. Okay, so the underlying infrastructure is actually uh, um, a container-based system. So there are two different types of containers that we can deploy into Azure. The first one is the older one that I mentioned before called Docker. Docker has been around for quite a while, and it is a very popular a containering tool that is available pretty much for any organization to use. And then there is a newer one called Azure Kubernetes. Kubernetes is an open source platform that uses open source software for the container structure. And the difference between Docker and Kubernetes is that Kubernetes not only gives you the container, but it also gives you orchestration services for the containers. So things like distributed architectures, containers there are large volumes of containers that have the same virtual application running in them. And simply put, the advantage of having a container is that I can run more applications against a single set of resources than not. So if you think about it from the point of view of a Hyper-V machine, so you have a virtual server and you create one virtual system. So you have VMware as an example. And on VMware, you create a virtual machine called Server 1. And Server 1 is going to be your Exchange server. When you install Exchange, Microsoft Exchange only allows you to install one instance of Exchange at a time on a device, whether it's a physical box or a virtual machine. You can only create one instance of Exchange. If I was to create Exchange in a container, then I would actually run the container on the virtual machine rather than Exchange, and I could run more than one instance. So the advantage that I get is that based on whatever hardware resources I have on the virtual machine that the container is sitting on, then it will be able to run multiple instances of that application because it exists entirely inside of the container. And because the containers that we have are platform as a service infrastructure level items, Microsoft is worried about the underlying infrastructure that those containers live in. So it does allow you to expand and change the amount of resources that are required to give you distributed architectures, to do large amounts of information processing through those, and they can exist in the same underlying technology. So containers are a very useful way of managing and implementing applications in your organization. So much to the fact that you can now create Docker containers on your Windows 10 desktops with the latest release of the software update. So you can actually start running containers locally on your local desktop that give you the same capabilities and features as you have with Docker in the cloud. So as I said, the only difference really between Kubernetes and the Azure Container Instance is Docker, is the whole orchestration piece. And really the orchestration piece is there for when systems have to expand and decrease in size, for all of the resources that you're working with. Okay, so virtual desktop. The Windows Virtual Desktop is the next step here. Really, all we're doing is we're taking all of our desktop and applications and running them virtually in the cloud. So you create your desktop virtualization environment. You don't have to run any gateway servers or any of that sort of stuff. and you can publish unlimited hosts, and you can reduce costs by pooling these systems together and creating multi-session resources, right? So a few years ago, there was a big push to create these virtual infrastructures or virtual desktops, VDI, where you would have a centralized server that would be running several instances of the application. And on your desktop, instead of having the application installed, you would run as a remote desktop connection to a virtual desktop that would have that virtual application. So it never actually existed on your desktop. You just ran it across the network. What Windows Virtual Desktop is doing is exactly the same thing, is that you're creating these Windows virtualized items and you're running them across the cloud. There is a new service that Microsoft is bringing out, and it is called WAAS, or Windows as a Service. Windows as a Service is running Windows desktops as virtual environments or virtual services in the cloud in Azure, right? So it's sort of one step above the Windows Virtual Desktop, because in the Windows Virtual Desktop, you actually have to go in and administer the virtual machine and all the rest of it. With Windows as a Service, you don't. It actually publishes Windows 11 virtual desktops, and so you'll be able to use those in your environment. I personally haven't quite figured out how that's going to work quite yet. If the idea is to reduce the amount of hardware that you need to actually run Windows desktop, that kind of doesn't make sense to me, because you still need to have some sort of a device that has to have an operating system on it. So I'm not quite sure exactly until I've played around with it exactly how it will work, but it is a new service that is available in the Azure platform. Up until about a week or so ago, you could actually get a free copy of it and a trial of it, but so many organizations and stuff were so interested in it that Microsoft had to stop giving out the free ones, because it was overloaded the systems that they had, because they're not really production yet. So part of the other features that are available, as I mentioned prior, are the Azure networking services. So the Azure networking services are made up of three components or three parts. They're made up of virtual networks. So in a normal network, you have gear for switching and routers and firewalls and that sort of stuff. What an Azure virtual network is just the virtual version of the same thing. So it's how you route traffic between the systems. All of the computers on a certain interface are all part of the same networking infrastructure, all that sort of structure. Those are all the same for each of the platforms. And so we get to see from a networking point of view, an IP address scheme and all that sort of stuff. A virtual private network gateway is a way that you can encrypt traffic between an Azure virtual network and an on-premise location over the public network. So, when you go and you do mobile computing, you will be given a VPN connection and VPN access to your corporate network. And then once you've logged into the VPN, you'll get access to file shares and to applications and resources that exist internally. And so all that we're doing now is that we're setting up that VPN to communicate between your network that you have on-prem and an Azure virtual network that exists in the cloud. Okay. This can get expensive, and it can get hard to manage, because if you have a lot of connections that you need to make from your on-prem network to the cloud network, using a virtual private network gateway isn't the best method. The best method is to set up an express route. And basically what the express route does is it extends the on-premise network into the Azure over a private connection that's facilitated by a connectivity partner. So if you have a large number of users that are constantly trying to access resources in the cloud in conjunction with the resources on-prem, then you're better off getting a dedicated connection between where you are and the Azure private network. So as an example, in the US, you might use AT&T. In Canada, you might use Bell or Telus or Rogers. And so you pay basically for a dedicated connection between you and the closest data center for your network connection. So as an example, in the States, depending upon where you are, there's 15 of them. In Canada, there's 4. In Europe, there's about a dozen or so, maybe a bit more. In the UK, there's 5 of them, 6 of them, no, 8 of them, and that sort of thing. So, so having this express route is just a more efficient and cost-effective way of being able to have that transmission of network traffic between the on-premise system and the cloud. Azure Storage is basically hard disk, okay? And it's broken down into different storage types. There are container storage, which stands for blob, binary large objects. And this is optimized for storing massive amounts of unstructured data. So these are things like text files and Word documents and Excel spreadsheets and that sort of stuff. Anything that is not structured in the sense of a database file, right? It's just a large binary number, and it stores that file into that location. Disk storage is sort of one step up from container storage. Disk storage gives you your own virtual disks that are associated to virtual machines and applications for you to be able to administer. Okay, so it's the same as on a local virtual machine in Hyper-V or VMware, that you create the virtual machine, and then you're going to create the virtual disk that's attached to it that has the operating system and the application and your data stored to. Okay, so it's the same concept. It's just you're now moving it in up into the cloud. And then lastly is Azure Files. So Azure Files are highly available network storages that take advantage of server message block protocols, so SMB. It is the fastest file system. It is also the most expensive file system because, of course, you're keeping this data live all the time, and you will then be able to need to know how to get the system up and running, and keep it up and running from terms of cost and availability. So Azure Storage comes in 3 tiers. And you can pick and choose the tiers at any point in time. So the one on the left, the hot tier, means that the data is always live. It's always stored and accessed frequently. So let's say databases, that sort of thing. So that data is hot, okay? And of course, it's the most expensive of the 3 types of tiers. It's also generally going to have the fastest disk. So hot tiered storage generally is made up of SSD drives versus traditional platform hard drives. And so because of the fact that SSDs cost more and you need more of them to be the equivalent of a physical platter hard disk, the cost for a hot storage is greater than cost for non-hot storage. Cool storage is optimized for storing data that's infrequently accessed and then stored over the 30-day period, okay? And then if it's required, it can jump to hot, and if it's not, then it leaves it at cool and so forth. And the system can automatically flip back and forth for things like caching and so forth. And the third one is archive storage. And this is for storage when you're doing long-term storage for things that are rarely accessed and will be stored for at least 180 days in terms of some latency and that sort of thing. So a lot of organizations have started using Azure as their backup storage location. And so you would use the archive storage type as a way for you to put that information there. So when you do your SQL Server backups nightly, or you do your file server backups nightly, instead of writing them to tape for extended storage, you would write them up to the cloud, into Azure, and you would store them there. Now, when you do that, you have a lot of network transfer, and obviously potentially a lot of disk space. So when you do use the archiving storage type, you pay less per gigabyte for the actual storage amount, but you don't pay any fee for the data upload. So you can have as much data uploaded into the system as you want, and that's fine, but you will pay, obviously, for the amount of storage that you're using and consuming. With the other 2 systems, again, transfer of data into the system is free, but the transfer of the data out costs more because it has to be coming from a more active network connection or a more active disk system than if it was in an archive system. So some other things that are available as part of the sort of infrastructure of the system are Azure database services. So unlike a normal network infrastructure, you would have to create your own instances of SQL Server or Oracle or DB2 or MySQL or NoSQL or whatever it is that you were running for your database systems. But Microsoft has provided an infrastructure platform of the database offerings that are available in the cloud. So if you're used to using the standard SQL Server, there is Azure SQL Database. This is Database as a Service, or DAS, and it's using the latest stable version of SQL Server. The thing about DAS is that you don't actually have to build a SQL Server in the cloud. You just load your database file into the service, and then you administer it exactly the same way as you would if it was an on-prem tool using SQL Server Management Studio or SQL Server Data Studio, either one of those, or Visual Studio, and any of those tools can be used to connect to and administer the databases that way for SQL. It also fully supports the Cosmo database infrastructure, which is a flat file, non-relational storage system, and allows for elastic, independently scaled storage throughout your cloud distribution. It can also support MySQL. So if you have open source databases based on MySQL, or you run PHP, then you can run the Azure SQL, the MySQL for Azure platform. And then also it supports the Postgres SQL platform as well out of the box. So there's also support for NoSQL. There's also support for FileNet. There's also support for other platforms as well that are available, that are more globally used for database services. You could, in theory, install things like DB2 from IBM as a virtual machine, or Oracle as well. You could do the same thing with Oracle and install it as a virtual machine as well. But then you wouldn't get advantage or take advantage of database as a service implementations.
This is very true. Cloud is accelerating the skills gap. Every day, Microsoft adds new features in Azure, right? What we're going to see in the next few months may be different with all the advancements that Microsoft is adding. In fact, this is actually an old slide, but this is very true. And the more advancements are added, the more the gap is widening. So it's very important that we are paying attention and getting the right education for us, whether we're individual, starting on a role in cloud, or you have employees that needs to do this. Also, what are the benefits? So for an employee, stand out, right? Get recognized. That this is one validation because we have a tangible number associated with it. And as they say, if you're certified, you earn more. And it also advances your career, whether you're currently in the market for a new job, or you want to get better at your current job. Definitely certification would help. And for the companies, this is something that most C levels appreciate, that it can help them with talent identification. Nowadays, the way we're being, the hiring uh, is being done, it puts a great deal in the certification of the candidate. Also, for current teams that have certified members, they can see that the team produces 20% more. And to the business, it has this huge impact that if you have a huge percentage of certified candidates, then your team gives a better overall impact. Okay. Now, what makes Microsoft certifications valuable? First and foremost, in terms of market share, as we all know, Microsoft is that dominant technology in the market. There are others, but Microsoft has grown its base and it is a market share leader. Um, it is first and foremost, the certification is aligned to relevant job roles. So as you saw earlier, we have certifications for cloud administrators, for cloud developers. It demonstrates that you know how to apply your skills in the real world, and it is a verified achievement. So you can't just say that, hey, I took the training, but you can say that I really know this, I have the skills because I am certified. Now, aside from that, as I said earlier, it is aligned to market opportunity. What is the market looking for? So whatever Microsoft has, definitely they have the certification to match it. And these are very critical skills to make your digital transformation successful. And Microsoft continues to update this. And we can have a whole lot of discussion, discussing about how easy it would be to maintain your certification. And also, Microsoft puts a great deal that all the Microsoft certified professional renews their certification every year just by upskilling themselves. There are more information on Microsoft Learn, and we can definitely explain that to you as well. Just contact us back. And just looking into the kind of questions you're getting from the exam, these are skill based questions. Gone are the days when you're going through multiple questions and you can guess it. Nope, can't do that anymore. Also, it requires experience, and you know how to apply those skills, and hands-on labs are also included in the exam. It's we don't want to scare you that it's difficult, but it really demonstrates that you have the skills if you pass the exam. You can also shout out to the world your recognition. You can add it in your LinkedIn profile, and this actually also solidifies your role in your current employment, or if you're looking for work, then this really helps you to land that job that you want. Okay, so just a few more stats here. 91% of certified IT pros says certification gives them the credibility. 93% of decision makers agree that this has a lot of added value, and 52% says that this expertise is more sought after within their organization. This is just an example, since we discussed since we discussed an intro to AZ 900. These are the kinds of skills that are measured, and I'd like to just go quickly to our website. This is our website. You can just go to Microsoft to check out other resources that we have here, such as the role-based certification path. This gives you an idea on what are the different certification and training, and these are all links to the actual courses, so you can read the outline. Another thing is, if you are you're representing a company, there are several ways to purchase training. We have our NetCom Unlimited, which provides you with 12 months unlimited access to more than 500 virtual instructor led training. Or you have our Learning Passport. Or you can just go to our schedules. If you're one person and you want an open enrollment, you just can, look for the different schedules that we have available for you.